Laia stands in front of the elevator mirror. She sees her pale face and forces the muscles in her cheeks to tense into a cold, confident smile. Her fingers are icy cold, and her heart is pounding so loudly she thinks she can hear it in the complete silence of the elevator. She's wearing a simple yet elegant black dress. In one hand, she clutches a small purse. Inside is the very same test. The elevator stops at the top floor. The doors open silently. Another corridor and a massive door appear before her. She takes a deep breath and exhales all her fear. Now her face is a mask of arrogance. She approaches the door. Two large men in dark suits emerge from behind it. Their eyes study her. "There's no entrance here," one of them says, his voice low and brooking no argument. Laia doesn't blink. She looks straight at him. "Jaho is waiting for me. We have an appointment." The guard exchanges a glance with his partner. "Your name isn't on the list." "He added it 5 minutes ago." She pretends to check the time on her phone. "Tell him Laia is here. He remembers me." Her tone is so confident that the guard hesitates for a second. He turns away and quietly speaks into the microphone on his sleeve. Laia stands still, her posture expressing slight impatience. She feels a bead of sweat trickle down her back. Finally, the guard turns around and nods. "Come in." The door opens. She crosses the threshold. The penthouse is enormous. Panoramic windows offer views of the city at night. Inside, minimalism reigns. Cool marble floors, light leather sofas. This place exudes wealth, but it lacks coziness. The guard silently points her in the direction. She approaches a dark wooden door. Without giving herself time to think, she turns her hand and enters. The office is even larger than she expected. A man sits behind a massive dark wood desk. Jaho. He doesn't look at her, his attention riveted on his laptop screen. The lamplight highlights his distinct features. He's younger than he looks in the photographs, but his posture exudes an air of authority. He looks up at her. His gaze is dark, penetrating, and expressionless. He's not surprised, not angry, not interested. He's just looking. Laia forces her legs to carry her forward toward the table. Each step is a huge effort. She stops in front of him. She feels her cheeks burning, but hopes he'll mistake it for anger. Without a word, she opens her purse, takes out a plastic stick, and places it directly on the glossy surface of the desk in front of him. The two bright pink stripes look out of place and provocative in this austere office. He slowly moves his gaze from her face to the test, and then back to her. There's still no glimmer of understanding in his eyes. And then Laia says the words she's rehearsed hundreds of times. Her voice is clear, precise. "Congratulations, we're having a baby." She pauses briefly. "I understand you don't remember me. I was your girlfriend for only one night." The air in the office freezes. The silence becomes loud, oppressive. Jaho doesn't move. His gaze remains fixed on her, but now something awakens deep within it. Not emotion, but pure, dispassionate analysis. A few seconds pass. He slowly pushes the laptop aside. His fingers clasp on the table. He doesn't take his eyes off her. Everything inside him boils. He mentally goes over the last 3 years. He carefully avoided any casual relationships. He doesn't trust anyone. This woman is lying. That's absolutely certain. His first thought is cruel. He imagines his men escorting her out of here, never to bother him again. But then his mind formulates another plan. A quick end is too merciful for such a brazen con artist. She came here thinking she could outsmart him. She wants money. That means she feels a sense of power over him, however imaginary. He will decide to make her feel that power. He will allow her to believe in her success. He will play this game, throwing more and more money and attention at her, until her lie becomes so big that she becomes entangled in it. And then, at the very peak of her supposed triumph, he will bring it all down. She will destroy herself, and he will watch. This idea of revenge seems far more sophisticated and satisfying to him. His face finally comes alive. He feigns shock. His eyebrows rise slightly, his eyes widen. He looks at the test again, then at her, and now there's a strained, uncertain joy in his gaze. "It's unexpected," he says, his voice muffled, as if overcome with emotion. He runs his hand over his face, mimicking a man trying to come to his senses. The child. Yes, you're right. It's very important. He stands and slowly walks around the table, stopping a couple of steps away from her. He doesn't get too close, keeping his distance. I won't let my heir grow up without a father, under any circumstances. Laia feels a wave of relief almost knock her off her feet. She clenches her fingers into fists to hide their trembling. She didn't expect it to work so quickly. I'm glad you say that. Her voice is still even, but there's a sincerity in it that she hadn't intended to put in. Jaho approaches a small safe built into the wall. He enters the code, and the door opens. He takes out a thick envelope. He turns to her and hands it to her. This is for now, for basic needs, clothes, vitamins, whatever you need. Take it. It's a trap. He wants to see if she'll take the money right away. This will confirm her selfish intentions and cement her as a greedy con artist in his eyes. Laia pauses for a second. She didn't expect the money right away. Her plan involved a long game, regular payments. This envelope is a real, tangible sign of her victory. She slowly reaches out and takes it. It's heavy. Thank you, she says quietly. Oi, you're welcome, he says, returning to his desk, his expression becoming businesslike again. Everything will change now. We need to take care of everything. When did you see the doctor? How long have we got? The question sounds solicitous, but his eyes sharpen. He's setting the first test trap. Laia tenses internally. She's prepared for this. She's relying on general knowledge. I haven't officially seen a doctor yet. I just took a test. But according to my calculations, the pregnancy is very early, about 6 weeks. She says this with utmost confidence. Jaho nods, his expression expressing understanding. But deep down, his mind registers a discrepancy. If this were true, that night should have happened 6 weeks ago. And he knows exactly where he was and with whom 6 weeks ago. There were no random nights in his schedule. His certainty of her lie reaches 100%. Now he knows he's playing with an amateur. That makes things easier. I understand, he says softly. I need to make an appointment with the best specialist immediately. I'll arrange everything. He smiles at her, and it almost seems genuine. You need to rest now. Give me your phone number. I'll contact you tomorrow to discuss the details. Laia dictates the number to him. She feels giddy with success. She puts the envelope in her purse and turns to leave. She feels his gaze on her back, but now it seems less frightening. As soon as the door closes behind her, the smile instantly disappears from Jaho's face. He presses a button on his phone. Kim, come in. A moment later, his assistant, a tall, fit man with an impassive face, enters the office. That woman who just left. Her name is Laia, Jaho says, his voice cold and emotionless again. Put her under total surveillance, around the clock. I need to know everything. Where she lives, who she talks to, where she goes, what her debts are. Find her weak spot, all her financial affairs, her entire past. I want the full dossier. Kim boasts without asking any unnecessary questions. It will be done. He turns and walks out. Jaho goes to the window. Somewhere down there, among the city lights, that woman is walking now, carrying an envelope of his money in her purse. He looks out at the city, his face stony. The hunt has begun. Laia steps outside and takes her first deep breath, feeling the trembling finally subside. She turns the corner and rests her forehead against the cool wall of the building. Her body shakes with nervous hiccups, a near-hysterical laugh. She did it. She's crazy, but she did it. She walks into the first expensive bar she comes across, orders a glass of wine, and sits down in the far corner. She takes out her phone and sends her friend a short message. It's okay. He believed me. Almost immediately, a reply arrives, filled with exclamation points and emoticons. Laia turns off her phone. She needs some time alone. She places the thick envelope on the table in front of her. She doesn't open it. She simply looks at it. It's more money than she's ever seen in her entire life, but the euphoria quickly gives way to a heavy, cold feeling in her stomach. She's just left the office of one of the most powerful and likely dangerous men in the city. She lied to his face, and he believed her. Too fast? Too easy? She remembers his eyes. There wasn't a drop of genuine joy or surprise in them. There was only a strange predatory intentness. He looked at her as if she were an intriguing problem. Her initial investigation had been superficial. She'd learned about his habits, his wealth, his solitary life. She'd assumed he was simply a rich playboy who wouldn't remember one face among many. But the man in that office was no carefree playboy. He was cold as a knife blade. Her frivolous plan, built on rumors and assumptions, suddenly seemed like child's play. She realizes she's gotten herself into a game whose rules she doesn't know, and against an opponent whose true strength she can't even begin to fathom. Fear returns, but now it's not the panic of failure, but a sober, cold calculation. She can't afford to be wrong, not for a second. She must truly study him. She must understand who she's dealing with. Her recklessness burns away, leaving behind only a sharp, searing awareness of the risk. She pays for the wine and leaves the bar. The envelope lies in her purse, feeling less like a trophy than like the first pawn in a very dangerous game that has only just begun. She walks down the street, feeling as if she's being watched from every shadow. And perhaps she is. A week passes. Laia lives in a strange state of suspended anticipation, each day like the last, filled with anxious anticipation and dread. The envelope with this money lies untouched in her dresser drawer, wrapped in an old sweater like a shameful secret. She can't bring herself to spend a single bill. Every time she looks at it, she feels a wave of nausea and a sharp, stabbing pain of guilt somewhere deep in her ribs. She tries to learn more about Jaho, spending hours at the computer in the nearby library, leafing through business magazines and gossip columns, but the information is scant and superficial. He is a public figure. His face flashes at charity galas and the openings of new business centers, but his personal life, his past, his true nature are shrouded in a thick, impenetrable veil. She realizes she's playing with fire, knowing neither its temperature nor its destructive power. But there's no turning back now. She made her bet, and now she has to wait for the outcome. Her phone vibrates on the table, making her jump and almost drop her teacup. An unknown number, but her body, her nerves, recognize the threat even before her brain can process the numbers. She takes a deep, ragged breath, trying to squeeze out at least a drop of confidence, and answers. "Hello?" Her voice sounds slightly hoarse. "Laia, this is Jaho." His voice is even, cold, without a single note of emotion, like a weather reporter. "Come to me. Right now." He doesn't ask if she can, doesn't inquire about her affairs or plans. He simply states a fact, issues an order. He throws out an address, the very one burned into her memory, a penthouse with a view of the entire city, and hangs up without giving her a chance to say anything. Laia sits with the phone in her frozen hand, feeling her heart sink into her heels, the floor beneath her feet seeming to grow shaky. This is it, the moment of truth. Either he's checked everything, found inconsistencies in her story, and is about to deal with her harshly, or she's afraid to think that either. Her imagination conjures up only vague, frightening images. An hour later, after traveling by metro and on foot, she stands in his office again. Everything is just as sterile, cold, and incredibly rich. The air smells of expensive leather and a clean, almost medicinal aroma. Jaho is sitting at his massive desk, but this time he's not immersed in paperwork. He looks directly at her, appraisingly, scrutinizingly, his dark eyes gliding over her face, her figure, noting every detail. "I've changed my mind," he says without preamble, without greetings, as if continuing their conversation yesterday. "Money is unreliable. It can be spent, taken away, it runs out. This is a temporary solution." He stands, his movements fluid and full of hidden strength. He slowly walks around the table and approaches her. He stands so close that she feels the warmth radiating from him, catching the light, complex, and expensive scent of his perfume, wood, leather, and something sharp, almost metallic. "If this is my child," he pauses, deliberately, theatrically, and the small word "if" hangs in the air between them, heavy and ominous, like an accusation. "I will be involved in everything, completely, without compromise. Starting today, you are moving in with me." Peace for Lai narrows down to this one point, to his dark, impenetrable eyes. She feels the floor finally give way beneath her feet, and her ears begin to ring. This is the nightmare she dreaded most, to be trapped with this man 24 hours a day, under constant surveillance, without the opportunity to breathe, to relax, to be herself. But, her voice breaks, trembling treacherously, my work, my apartment, it can't be that simple. You quit. I'll provide for you, completely. Leave the apartment, you won't need it anymore. His tone is even, steely, brooking no argument. This isn't an auffigat. It's an ultimatum, a sentence. My people are already on their way to you. They'll pack your things. You just need to tell them what to take. Let's go. He takes her by the elbow, his touch firm, merciless, and undeniable, and leads her toward the exit. Laia feels like a puppet, her legs moving of their own accord, obediently following his guiding movements. She has no choice, no strength to resist. She understands that this is part of his plan, the same sophisticated revenge she dreaded so many nights. And she, like a pawn, has been caught in its very core. He's not simply punishing her, he's plunging her into the very depths of a nightmare, only to watch her drown there. Thus begins her new life. A life in a gilded cage. She is assigned a luxurious apartment on the other side of the penthouse, with its own enormous white marble bathroom and panoramic windows overlooking the glittering city. But this luxury is stifling. The door to her room is never locked. His numerous security detail or silently moving servants constantly pass by, stone-faced. Her freedom is limited by the walls of this room. She cannot leave without his personal permission and the obligatory escort of one of the guards, whose silent presence at her back feels like the barrel of a gun. The worst part is the constant, minute-by-minute need to act out a role. She sews little pillows for herself out of old towels and places them under her clothes every day. Gradually, week after week, increasing the size of her artificial belly, she spends every morning in the bathroom, leaning over the toilet and miming morning sickness, making loud, realistic sounds that someone is sure to hear and report. She studies medical articles online, forums for expectant mothers, and watches videos to learn every detail of how pregnant women behave, how they move, how carefully they sit and stand, how they almost automatically stroke their belly while talking to their unborn child. She rehearses these movements in front of the mirror until they look natural. It's an exhausting daily performance that drains all her mental energy. Jaho watches. He attends the dinners they now share in the dining room with its insanely long, polished table, where they sit at opposite ends, like strangers. He asks the right, caring questions. How are you feeling today? Would you like some freshly squeezed juice? Aren't you cold? Should I bring a blanket? His words are correct, but his eyes remain cold, distant, analytical. He watches her performance with the curiosity of a scientist observing the behavior of a laboratory animal in a maze. He waits for her mistake, the first crack, the first fissure in this fragile facade. And she knows it. Every day of hers turns into a grueling marathon on the brink of a nervous breakdown, where she can't relax for a second. One evening, after several weeks of this existence, something unexpected happens, something not in the script of their game. Laia is sitting in the vast, nearly empty living room, trying to read a book she's taken from his shelf. Some difficult philosophical treatise she can't understand. She can't concentrate, the words blur before her eyes. She feels so alone and afraid that it's almost physically painful, constricting her throat and pressing on her chest. Jaho emerges from his office. He looks tired. The shadows under his eyes seem deeper than usual, his shoulders slightly hunched. He silently walks into the kitchen and returns a short while later with 2 large porcelain cups in his hands. He places one of them in front of her on the low glass table. Drink it. Herbal, chamomile, mint. It's supposed to calm your nerves, seize, he says, and his voice sounds different, less polished than usual, a simple human weariness laced in it. This simple, almost mundane gesture takes her so by surprise that for a second she's speechless. He's never done anything like this for her, never shown such simple, unrelated care. She looks at the cup, wafting a light, fragrant steam, then at him, searching his eyes for a trick, a mockery, but sees only the same weariness. Thank you, she says quietly, almost in a whisper, clasping the cup with her palms, feeling its living, warming heat. He sinks heavily into the chair opposite. They sit for several minutes in complete silence, drinking hot tea. Huge! The penthouse is immersed in a resounding silence, broken only by the measured ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. It's not a hostile silence, but a strange, shaky, almost peaceful one. Once upon a time, many years ago, Jaho says suddenly, looking into his cup, I wanted to become an architect. Laia freezes, afraid to move, to breathe too loudly so as not to frighten this fragile, incredible moment of candor. I even had blueprints, sketches of different buildings, bridges. Nonsense! He cuts himself off, his voice becoming harsh again. But the crack in his armor, in his icy mask, was momentarily open, and she saw it. Laia understands that this is her chance. Not to win, but to survive. To build at least some kind of bridge, even the flimsiest one, across the chasm that separates them. I dreamed of dancing as a child, she says, squeezing out a half-truth. Dance was her younger sister's passionate dream, not hers. But that's not important now. What's needed now is words, sincerity, even if it's fabricated. Ballet. My parents couldn't afford the lessons. They said it was pointless, wouldn't bring in any money, wouldn't feed the family. He looks up at her, and deep within, behind the eternal analytical screen, a shadow of something else appears. Something like understanding. A kind of recognition. Parents often make mistakes, he says, and there is not a drop of condescension or pity in his words, only a statement of a fact that he, apparently, also knows firsthand. At this moment, they are not a mafioso and a con artist, not an executioner and a victim. They are simply two lonely people, forced to lie to each other and to the world, finding a strange, tense, and very fragile solace in this sudden silence and in these fictional, but no less significant, stories from a past that may never have been. This is a moment of unexpected intimacy, dangerous for both of them, because it blurs the clear boundaries of their game, confuses the cards, and makes them forget their roles. But a game is a game. The next morning, Jaho is again cold, collected, and distant. He gives her instructions regarding the schedule for an appointment with the gynecologist he's supposedly found. His voice once again smooth and impenetrable. And Laia must again place a pillow, feign, and remember that her every move could be her last in this dangerous play. However, something has shifted, not in the plot, but within themselves. The fear within her mingled with a sharp, unbidden curiosity, and his cold calculation with a slight, almost imperceptible interest in the woman who dared to challenge him and now shares his loneliness. A few days later, he's sitting at his desk in his office. She's perched on the sofa by the window, leafing through a glossy magazine and only pretending to read. He reaches for a heavy, leather-bound volume, ostensibly to find some information for an upcoming business meeting. His long fingers seem to accidentally unclench. The book, large and massive, falls off the desk with a dull, ponderous thud, describing a short arc and landing squarely in her lap on that false, rag-stuffed belly. Laia's reaction is instantaneous, primitive, and completely natural. She doesn't think. She doesn't remember that she's supposed to be impersonating a pregnant woman, for whom the fall of any object, even a light one, on her stomach is a potential catastrophe, a reason to panic and immediately visit a doctor. She simply leaps sharply, almost cat-like, away from the falling object, screaming in surprise and instinctive fear. The book lands with a loud thud on the parquet floor, narrowly missing her foot. Silence reigns, the same silence that follows a sudden, deafening bang. Laia freezes, her breath catching, her chest tightening. Slowly, very slowly, she looks up at Jaho. He sits completely still, making no attempt to pick up the book. His eyes are fixed on her. He doesn't look at the fallen tome. He looks straight at her, into her very core. His gaze is clear, pure, and absolutely calm. A heavy, echoing, oppressive silence hangs in the air, echoing the collapse that has just occurred. Her entire carefully constructed world. He understands everything, and she, looking into his eyes, sees with absolute chilling clarity that he understands. The game is over. He leans back in his chair slowly, almost lazily, his fingers steepling in front of him. He doesn't look angry, furious, or even surprised. He looks satisfied. It's the look of a chess player who has finally delivered the checkmate he planned. Good reaction, he finally says, breaking the silence. His voice is quiet, even, without a single high note, like the surface of a lake in complete calm before the worst storm. Very fast, instinctive. For a non-pregnant woman, perfect! These words fall between them like a final, irrevocable sentence. Laia feels all the blood drain from her face, leaving her skin cold and clammy. Her hands, resting in her lap, become completely icy. Her fingers numb. She sits, pressed against the back of the sofa, unable to move or make a sound. This is the end, the finale. The game is lost, and in the most humiliating way, because of a stupid, accidental mistake, because of the betrayal of her own nerves. She waits. Waits for anger, screams, icy fury, an order for security to throw her out into the street or do something far more terrible and irreversible to her. She closes her eyes, preparing for the blow, physical or verbal. It doesn't matter. The main thing is the inevitable retribution. But the blow doesn't come. The room remains quiet. Instead, she hears his calm, measured voice. There's not a hint of threat in it. Now, says Jaho, and a strange, almost scientific curiosity can be heard in his intonation. You will tell me the whole truth. She forces herself to open her eyes. He looks at her not with fury, not with hatred, but with intense, searching, meticulous interest. Looking at her frightened, chalk-white face, at her trembling, helplessly clenched hands, he feels no triumph or anger. He feels something else, something more complex, a keen respect for her desperate, bordering on madness, courage. For how long, day after day, she played this grueling, nerve-wracking game, balancing on the edge of a knife. And this respect is mixed with an overwhelming, burning desire to know why. What drove her, a fragile and, as he now understands, desperate girl, to take such a reckless risk against him? Who are you? His question sounds less like an accusation than a demand to get to the bottom of it, to understand the motives, to disassemble the mechanism down to the last screw. And why did you need this? Begin. From the very beginning. There will be no reprisal. Confession is offered instead, and at this moment, Lai finds this a far more terrifying ordeal, because she doesn't know, can't imagine, what will happen after the last lie is washed away by the truth. Opening up to this man, placing her true, vulnerable story in his hands, seems like an act of immense trust and immense stupidity at the same time. But she no longer has a choice. Laia sits pressed against the back of the sofa, her fingers digging convulsively into the upholstery. The silence in the office after his words seems deafening. She looks at Jaho, at his calm, expectant face, and understands that this is the end. The end of the lies, the end of the game, the end of everything. But at the same time, it is also liberation. No more pretending, no more carrying this unbearable burden. She lowers her eyes, unclenches her whitened fingers, and slowly begins to speak. Her voice is quiet, broken, at first almost a whisper, but gradually, as the words spill out, it gains strength, filling with the pain and despair she's held inside for so long. Her name is Mia, she says, her eyes filling with tears, which she quickly wipes away furiously. My little sister, she's only 19. She tells him everything, without embellishment, without trying to evoke pity, simply stating the brutal facts about the rare genetic disease that slowly but inexorably destroyed Mia's body, about how their ordinary, modest life collapsed one day with the diagnosis, about endless hospital visits, consultations, hopes and disappointments. The doctors said there was a chance, a specialized clinic in Germany, an experimental method, but the cost. She bites her lip, looking at the floor again. These are figures I couldn't have imagined even in my wildest dreams. My mother and I sold everything we could sell. We took out loans, borrowed from everyone we could, but it was still a drop in the ocean. She talks about her despair, about sleepless nights spent searching for a way out, about working 3 jobs, none of which came close to providing enough income, about the moment she realized she couldn't cope with conventional means. I saw you in a magazine. Her gaze meets his for a moment. Him, I read about you, about your money, about your reputation, about the fact that you have many women. I thought, I thought that you wouldn't notice, wouldn't remember, that one extra night in your life wouldn't change anything. But for me, it was the only chance. I studied your habits, the places you visit. I came up with a story. I decided that pregnancy is what will make you pay, regularly, until I collect the required amount. She falls silent, exhausted. All her lies, all her carefully constructed structures, are dismantled brick by brick and laid out before him. She doesn't beg for mercy. She simply sits, devastated and defenseless, ready to accept any of his will, any consequences. Her sincerity in this moment is naked, vulnerable, and shocking. She doesn't play. She doesn't manipulate. She simply surrendered. Jaho listens to her without interrupting. His face remains an impenetrable mask, but behind it, his brain is hard at work, analyzing every word, every intonation. He, a master of lies and deceit, can distinguish acting from truth at a glance. And this is the truth. The naked, ugly, desperate truth. He sees the pain in her eyes, hears the tremor in her voice when she says her sister's name. He watches her try to hold back her tears, and this sight strikes him far more than all her previous attempts at acting. Lying required effort, but this truth poured out of her like blood from a wound. Something stirred within him, not pity, never pity, but a strange respect for the scale of her despair. She turned against him not out of greed, not out of stupidity, but out of love. It was a motive he could not deny was powerful. For a moment, there's silence in the office. He slowly rises from his chair, walks to the bar in the corner, and pours 2 glasses of water. He returns and places one in front of her. A simple, human gesture that, under the circumstances, seems almost unbelievable. "Drink," he says shortly. She mechanically picks up the glass and takes a small sip. The cold water stings her parched throat. Jaho moves to the window, turning his back to her, looking out at the city at night. His mind is calculating his options, weighing the risks and benefits. Her exposure was a personal victory, but now he sees a new, unexpected potential in the situation. "Okay," he finally says, turning around. His voice is businesslike again, devoid of emotion. "I accept your truth." Laia looks at him, not understanding. "You came to me for money for your sister's treatment. You will get it." He pauses, letting her take it all in. "I will pay all the debts, in full, and all future expenses for Mia's treatment, at the best clinic, with the best doctors, without limits." The stupefaction on Lai's face gives way to disbelief, then to a timid, almost painful hope. "But why? What do you want in return?" Her voice trembled. She knew nothing came for free, especially not from this man. "In exchange," he says, slowly approaching her, "we make a new agreement. You stay here, but now in a new role." He stops in front of her, his gaze sliding over her face, assessing, weighing. "You will become my official companion, my girlfriend. In public, at all events, receptions, social gatherings. You are beautiful, smart, and as I now understand, you have nerves of steel. You are perfect." Laia looks at him, trying to comprehend his words. "Why do you do this? To get revenge? To continue to mock me?" "It's not revenge." He shakes his head. "It's business necessity. My reputation, my lifestyle attracts a certain amount of attention. Too many eyes watching me. The police, competitors. A single man in my position is a target. A target for gossip, for inspections, for attacks. Having a steady, beautiful, respectable companion, it changes the picture. It creates an image of stability, normality. It distracts attention from other aspects of my activities. It makes me less interesting to those looking for scandals or weaknesses." He speaks calmly, logically, as if discussing the terms of a contract. "You'll play the role of a loving bride. You'll always smile, hold my hand, and look happy. You'll wear expensive clothes that I choose, say what I say, and be where I tell you. Your life will be scheduled down to the minute, but your sister will get her chance, a full chance." For him, it's still a deal, a pragmatic, cold calculation. A beautiful woman on his arm is an asset, An asset that can deflect unwanted glances, inspire trust in business partners, and confuse competitors. Her story, her motivations make her the ideal candidate. He has reliable leverage, her sister. She won't betray or run away, because the price is too high. For the bark of his words is both hell and salvation. She finds herself in a cage again, but this time the cage is bigger, more luxurious, and she opened the door herself with the truth, not a lie. She's selling not the illusion of pregnancy, but herself. Her freedom, her time, her body, her image. But in exchange, she's buying her sister's life. It's not a choice. It's an ultimatum, one she readily accepts. Okay, she breathes out, and in that word is all her fatigue, all her despair, and a new, strange determination. I agree. Excellent, Jaho nods. There's no warmth in his eyes, only satisfaction at a well-made deal. Then we'll start over. Forget about the pregnancy. Forget about that lie. We have a new deal now, and new rules. He turns and goes back to his desk, pressing the intercom button. Kim, come in. We need to discuss Signorina Laia's new living arrangements and her public image. Laia sits on the couch, listening as he gives orders to his assistant. She looks at his back, at this huge, cold penthouse that will now be her world. She saved Mia, at the cost of herself. She doesn't know what this new game, this new agreement, will bring her. But now, at this moment, she feels not fear, but a strange, chilling calm. The battle is lost, but the war for her sister's life has just taken a decisive, unexpected turn. And she is ready to pay her price, to the last penny. A month has passed, 30 days of life under the new rules. For Lai, they merged into a series of emasculated, glittering events, where her every gesture, every word, every smile was carefully rehearsed and approved by Jaho. She learned to wear couture dresses that weighed as much as a feather and cost as much as her old apartment. She taught herself not to blink when the cameras were on her, and to gently but confidently place her hand on his elbow, feigning tenderness and trust. They attended charity gala dinners, contemporary art exhibitions, and private receptions at embassies. Laia played her part flawlessly. She smiled, made small talk, her eyes sparkling with the hazel blue eyeshadow that matched her dress. But behind this perfect image lurked a constant, debilitating tension. They resembled two professional dancers perfecting a complex routine. Every touch was carefully calibrated, every glance part of the choreography. An invisible wall, constructed of deception, and a pragmatic bargain hung between them. He was her savior and jailer. She was his actress and hostage. And in this cramped, stuffy space of their forced intimacy, something else, something unforeseen in the contract, began to sprout. The hem of his dress, accidentally brushing against his arm as they climbed into the limo, caused a strange electric tingling sensation. His hand on her waist during the photo shoot no longer seemed simply a necessary gesture, but something heavy, meaningful, leaving an invisible mark on her skin. They caught each other's glances when they thought the other wasn't looking, and then immediately looked away, as if caught in the act of something forbidden. But the past wouldn't let go. The shadow of her lies, his mistrust, lay between them like a heavy blanket. He never asked about Mia, but she knew he was checking. Every transfer to the clinic, every doctor's report, went through his people. He kept her hooked on her own truth, and she felt it every time his gaze lingered on her for a second longer than usual. It was at that moment, when their fragile, artificial world teetered on the brink of something real, that she emerged from Jaco's past. Irene. It happened at the opening of a new fashionable club. Laia, in a dazzling silver dress, stood, as expected, next to Jaho, smiling at the nameless guests. The air was thick with a mixture of expensive perfume and anticipation. And then a woman pushed her way through the crowd, tall, with perfect posture, in a form-fitting black dress that screamed money and power louder than any words. Her hair was the color of a raven's wing, and her eyes were cold as polished amber. Jaho! Her voice was low, velvety, with a slight mockery. What an unexpected meeting! Jaho turned to face her, and Laia saw the slightest hint of irritation flash across his eyes before they became impenetrable again. "Irene, I heard you're back. And I found you in such interesting company." Her gaze slid over Laia from head to toe, appraisingly, humiliatingly distant. "Would you mind introducing us, dear?" "Laia," Jaho said briefly. "This is Irene, eh? We once had joint business projects." "Had is such a boring word." Irene smiled sweetly, but her eyes remained cold. She extended her hand to Laia, who, obeying a trained reflex, shook it. The handshake was strong, almost painful. "I've heard so much about you, Laia. Everyone wonders where you came from. So fresh. So sudden." There was nothing directly offensive in her words, but every phrase was a jab. She spoke to her as if she were a strange little animal Jaho had brought in from the street. Irene was making it clear she knew about their deal, or at least guessed at its nature. She was a ghost of his past, an embodiment of the world from which he had tried to carve a new, more respectable mask for himself with Lai's help. And this ghost looked at her with undisguised contempt. "Our Jaho was always charitable," Irene continued, her gaze boring into Laia. He picked up, "Lost souls. I hope you realize your good fortune, my dear." Laia felt her face burn, but the smile didn't leave her lips. She squeezed her fingers on Jaco's elbow a little tighter. "I'm lucky to be able to be with such a person," she said crisply, looking Irene straight in the eyes. And for the first time that evening, there was a real steely edge to her voice. Irene nodded slowly, as if checking off an invisible checklist. "Charming. Well, I won't disturb you. I'm sure our paths will cross again, Jaho. It's always so nice to see how priorities change." She left as silently as she had appeared, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and a heavy, oppressive tension. For the rest of the evening, Laia felt like she'd been dressed in a dress made of razor blades. She perceived every look, every word, as a hidden mockery. Jaho was silent and focused. Irene wasn't just a former business partner. She was a threat, a living reminder that his past was still there, and that his current facade was vulnerable. The limo on the way home was silent. Laia stared out the window at the flickering lights, her hands clasped in her lap. "Who is she?" she finally asked quietly, unable to bear it any longer. Jaho answered shortly, "Dee." Without looking at her. "Forget about it. She knows, about me, about how none of this is real. She guesses. But it doesn't matter. You did well." It was the first praise he'd ever uttered to her, but it sounded as if he were praising a well-trained dog. Laia turned away, feeling a lump in her throat. She hated herself for this sudden, absurd jealousy, for the pain this woman's words had caused, for her own weakness. She was a pawn who suddenly realized she had feelings, and that was dangerous in their game. Several days passed after the evening with Irene. The tension in the penthouse reached boiling point. Jaho became even more withdrawn and demanding. Laia felt like she was walking on a razor's edge. Her only consolation were short, encrypted messages from her mother informing her that Mia was improving, that treatment had finally begun and was showing promising results. This was the straw she clung to keep from drowning in despair. One afternoon, Jaho left for what he claimed was an important meeting. Laia was left alone. With permission, of course, and under the supervision of security at the entrance. She decided to take a stroll through the nearby park, the only place she was allowed to go alone, along a strictly designated route and accompanied by one of Kim's men. The day was clear and sunny. The air smelled of grass and the distant hum of the city. Laia walked along the alley, trying to drown out her inner anxiety. The security guard, a young man with a stony face, followed her a few steps behind. She walked to a small fountain and sat on a bench, closing her eyes, turning her face to the sun. For a few moments, she managed to forget about Jaho, about Irene, about her role. She was simply herself, a lonely girl in the park. It was at that moment that it all happened. First, she heard a dull thud and a short, clipped scream from behind her. She turned and saw her guard collapse to the ground in a heap. 3 men in simple, non-marking clothing, wearing balaclavas, emerged from behind the trees. Their movements were swift and precise, Laia had no time to react, to scream, to run. One of them clamped his hand over her mouth. Another injected something thin and cold into her neck. The world swam before her eyes. Sounds became muffled. Her legs gave way. The last thing she felt was someone's strong arms catching her and the smell of someone else's sweat. Then a wave of black, sticky darkness rolled over her. When Jaho called Kim and told him Lai had been kidnapped, his first reaction was icy, practical fury. A system failure, a violation of his rules, an attack on his property. He ordered all his information networks to be alerted, threatening local police officials with the most dire penalties for inaction. He sat in his office, his face a mask of calm, but his fingers gripped the edge of his desk so tightly that his bones turned white. But as the hours dragged on and the information came in fragmented and confused, something inside him began to shift. He watched the security footage from the park, her limp body being roughly thrown into a black van with no license plates. He saw her scarf, the gift he'd given her the day before, lying on the ground. He imagined her face, not the smiling, perfect one from the tabloid photos, but the one frightened and tearful when she told him about her sister. And suddenly, it dawned on him. This wasn't just a threat to his reputation or the loss of an asset. This was something else, something sharp, animalistic, and all-consuming. The thought of her being treated roughly, of being hurt, of being frightened, evoked in him a blind, primal rage he'd never experienced in his life. He was ready to burn the entire city to the ground, turn over every stone, tear to shreds everyone involved, for her. He jumped up from his chair and began pacing the office. His pragmatic, cold mind refused to function. All his calculations, all his schemes collapsed before one simple fact. Laia was in danger, and he couldn't bear it. "Find her!" His voice sounded hoarse, almost alien, as he spoke to Kim on the phone again. "I'm not asking at what cost. Use everything, everyone. I want to know where she is in an hour. Who did this? Competitors? Irene? It doesn't matter. Just find her." He realized he'd made a fatal mistake. He'd put her on display, made her his symbol, his weakness, and his enemies had struck home. But this realization came later. Now, only a hurricane of fear and anger raged within him. He looked at her empty room, at the book she hadn't finished reading, lying on her bedside table, and felt something tighten in his chest, causing physical pain. He thought of her eyes, of that mixture of fear and determination when she agreed to his deal. He thought of the way her hand sometimes sought him out in the crowd, not by design, but instinctively. He thought of her quiet laughter, which he heard a couple of times when she was talking on the phone to her sister, thinking he couldn't hear. She was no longer a pawn. She had become something immeasurably greater, and this fact, realized in a moment of extreme danger, was simultaneously the most terrible and clearest revelation of his life. He had to find her. He had to get her back. Not because she was his property, but because without her presence, this huge, cold penthouse suddenly began to seem like the most dreary prison in the world. And he, Kim Jaho, the boss everyone feared, sat in his gilded cage, feeling utterly helpless for the first time in his life, realizing that the swindler he was about to teach a lesson had become the only person who made him feel anything. Several hours passed, the longest hours of Jako's life. He stood by the panoramic window, but he couldn't see the glittering city. Her face was before his eyes, pale, frightened. His usual cold calculation evaporated, giving way to a blind, animalistic rage. When his personal encrypted phone rang, he grabbed it so hard he almost crushed the casing. An unfamiliar voice, distorted by the vocoder, stated the terms. No police, no henchmen, just him. The place and the time. One violation, and she would be finished. Kim begged him not to go, offering to send a raiding party and wiretapping equipment. But Jaho was adamant. He saw this as the only way. He didn't trust her safety to anyone. "Get the car ready," he snapped, "and wait for my signal. If I'm not back in 2 hours, follow Phoenix Protocol." The Phoenix Protocol called for all-out war against anyone they suspected. It was an act of desperation, but for Jaho, that was secondary now. He arrived at an abandoned and industrial zone on the outskirts of the city. Old workshops with broken windows stood like dead giants under the pale moon. The wind blew between the rusty frames, howling in time with the frantically pounding heart. Jaho! He was led into the largest workshop. In the center, beneath a lone light bulb hanging from a beam, stood Laia. Her hands were bound behind her back, her mouth taped shut. Her hair was disheveled, and a bruise was red on her cheek. But her eyes, wide and terrified, seeing him, flashed not with hope, but with a new fear. She shook her head violently, trying to warn him. 5 men stood around in the shadows. Armed, the leader, a stocky man with a scar on his cheek, stepped forward. "So, boss," he croaked. "Decided to play the hero. Got the money?" Jaho slowly pulled a wad of $100 bills out of his inside pocket and threw it on the floor. "Let her go." The man chuckled. "I'll check first." He nodded to one of his men. As he picked up the pack, Jaho assessed the situation. 5. 3 had pistols, 2 had knives. The distance to Laia was about 10 meters. His gaze slid over her face, and he saw in her eyes not just fear but something else, something that made his heart clench. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for him. That's when it all started. The one checking the money shouted, "He's alone! No one else!" And Jaho moved. It wasn't a premeditated action. It was an explosion of pent-up rage, fear, and something else he didn't dare name. He wasn't a super soldier, but he was a street fighter who had risen through mud and blood. The first shot flew past his ear, deafeningly loud in the quiet of the workshop. Jaho ducked under it, somersaulted, and knocked down the nearest knife-wielding thug. Chaos erupted. Screams, gunshots, the sound of breaking glass. Laia closed her eyes, her body shaking with sobs. She saw Jaho moving in the gloom like a shadow. Quick, merciless. He used whatever came to hand. A broken pipe, a piece of rebar. A bullet grazed his shoulder, leaving a fiery streak. He didn't even cry out, just gritted his teeth and moved on. A second shot hit him in the leg. He stumbled, but didn't fall. The leader, a scarred man, realizing the situation, decided to play it safe. He pointed his pistol at Laia. "Stop!" he shouted, "or I'll shoot!" Jaho, bleeding and with a bloody face, rushed at him. He wasn't thinking about the bullet. He was only thinking about the fact that this man wanted to hurt her. He crashed into the bandit, and they both collapsed on the concrete floor. The gun went off into the ceiling. A desperate struggle ensued. Jaho, weakened by blood loss, was overcome by rage. He knocked the gun out of his opponent's hand. "Jaho!" A weak sound escaped from behind the tape. He froze. His hands loosened their grip. He turned around. Laia was looking at him, and there was no horror in her eyes. There were tears. And something else. Something that made his heart skip a beat. He stood up. Limping and bleeding, he approached her. His hands shook as he tore the tape from her mouth and began to untie the ropes. As soon as her hands were free, she pressed her palms to his bloody shoulder. "Why did you do this?" she whispered, her voice breaking with tears. "They could have destroyed you." He looked at her face smeared with dirt and tears, and everything inside him turned over. "They could have touched you." His voice was hoarse with pain. "I would have destroyed anyone who dared touch you. Ryushin, I almost destroyed you when you came to me with that stupid wand." There were no beautiful confessions in his words, but they meant much more. They meant that her safety was more important to him than his own life. Laia looked at him, tears streaming down her face, but now they were tears of relief. She pressed her forehead to his good shoulder, and they sat there amid the chaos. 2 lonely people who had found something real in each other. Sirens could already be heard in the distance, but for the 2 of them, nothing existed at that moment. Several months passed. Long months of recovery, both for Jaho, who was nursing a bullet wound, and for Mia, Lai's sister, who was finally on the mend. Something had changed in the penthouse. It no longer resembled a sterile museum. The living room now featured a comfortable chair, the kind Laia liked to sit in. Her favorite teas had taken up residence in the kitchen. Laia had changed. She was no longer playing a role. She was herself, sometimes thoughtful, sometimes laughing. She had become a strong woman who had found the strength to forgive herself for her past. Jaho had changed. He hadn't become softer with his enemies, but at home, he allowed himself to relax. He could listen to her stories for hours. He began to understand that there are things that can't be calculated, but are worth more than any bargain. One evening, they were sitting on the penthouse terrace. Laia snuggled up to him, wrapped in a large blanket. The silence between them was warm and vibrant. Jaho looked at the city lights, then turned to her. "You know," he said quietly, "the idea with the child wasn't such a bad one." Laia smiled, her eyes sparkling in the moonlight. Just this time, let's do without fake tests. Their game of lies was over. Real life had begun. From that evening on, the last barrier between them disappeared. The terrace, where their mornings began and their evenings ended, became their place. A place where they drank coffee, silently watching the city awaken. Where they shared scraps of thoughts and memories, no longer afraid of being used against them. Where Laia would sometimes catch him simply looking at her with an expression that took her breath away. He no longer controlled her every move. Her companion Kim was now more of a driver and assistant than a jailer. Laia began studying design. She'd always been drawn to it, but hadn't had the time or the means before. Jaho silently installed a powerful computer and graphics tablet in her apartment. He didn't make a gift of it, didn't expect gratitude. He simply saw her passion and gave her the opportunity. Sometimes in the evenings, she'd show him her sketches, designs of interiors, furniture. He, a man accustomed to numbers and authoritative decisions, would examine them carefully and say, "This needs more light," or "This line is too jagged." And he almost always hit the nail on the head. She'd laugh and call him a hidden talent. He'd just grin in response. They learned to argue, for real, not like a mafia boss and his girlfriend, but like two adults with different experiences and outlooks on life. He could be incredibly stubborn, she prickly and principled. One evening, they argued about a movie they'd seen, and Laia finally went to her room in a rage. An hour later, he knocked on the door, came in with 2 cups of cocoa, and said, "You're still wrong, but I don't want you to be angry." It was his ultimate admission of guilt. A few more months passed. Laia flew to visit her sister in Switzerland. Mia was recovering, her cheeks were pink, and the sparkle in her eyes was back. They talked a lot over video chat, and Laia, looking at her sister's smile, realized that every lie, every fear, every trial had been worth it. One day, returning from such a trip, she found Jaho in his office. He was concentrating on some documents, but when she entered, he put them aside. "How is she?" he asked simply. "Good, very good. The doctors say the prognosis is better than we hoped." He nodded, and something she'd never seen before flickered in his eyes, a deep, silent satisfaction. He didn't do this to tie her to him. He did it because he could. And in that moment, Laia realized that her feelings for him, born in a whirlwind of lies, fear, and unexpected salvation, had taken root and grown into something as solid as a rock. She walked up to his desk. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the money, not for the treatment, but for being the one who gave her sister life, for allowing her to see the real him, the man who wanted to be an architect." He took her hand, and his thumb ran over her palm. "You have nothing to be grateful for," he replied, and his voice lacked its usual dryness. There was only quiet confidence. Their life took on a new rhythm, calm and confident. Laia gradually began remodeling the penthouse's interior. She didn't change it radically, but she added details, warm textures, living plants, paintings they'd chosen together. The cold lobby was transforming into a home. One morning, she woke up early to find him gone. She went out onto the terrace and froze in the doorway. Jaho stood by the railing, 2 cups of coffee and a plate of croissants on a small table in front of him. He heard her footsteps and turned around. He was holding a small envelope. "This is for you," he said, holding it out. Laia took the envelope. Inside was a printout of an e-ticket. One way, to Switzerland, departure date, in 3 days. She looked at the ticket, not understanding. "I thought you should spend more time with her," he explained, his voice even. But she detected a hint of uncertainty in it. "Until she's fully recovered. A week, a month. However long it takes." He was letting her go, unconditionally, without demands for her return. He was giving her the freedom she hadn't had since the very beginning of their strange relationship. He was testing them both, giving her a choice. Laia looked up at him. There were tears in her eyes, but this time they were from the love and gratitude that filled her chest. "I don't want to leave for a month," she said quietly. He fell silent, looking at her intently. "I want to go there with you," she continued. "I want you to finally meet Mia. Not as a sponsor, not as an influencer, but as you." Jaho froze. Inviting him into her world, into the very life he'd once used as leverage, was a greater vulnerability than any battle with his enemies. It meant removing his final mask. He remained silent for so long that Laia began to fear that she had refused him. "Okay," he finally said. The one word that meant more to her than all the others. "I'll go with you." She walked up to him, hugged him, and pressed her cheek against his chest. She could hear the calm rhythm of his heart. They stood there, looking out at the waking city, and Laia suddenly realized with absolute clarity their story wasn't over. Their game of lies had ended, giving way to something fragile, real, and incredibly precious. And this was only the beginning, the real beginning